Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. This is Mark, and today I'm going to talk about inflation. Now, there's always a lot of talk around the political blogosphere, among politicians and political commentators, you name it, about inflation. And a lot of this manipulation, essentially, is really effective because people don't really understand inflation, and nobody bothers to define it. And guess what? I have been guilty of that too. I actually went back and looked at some of my videos about money supply and currency, and it's like I just skipped an explanation of what inflation was. Again, I'm just assuming that people understand. Bottom line is, it's not very helpful if you don't understand it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, inflation is something that affects everybody. It affects me, right? I mean, here's an example. If I get a 2% pay raise, awesome, right? And inflation's 3%, then I don't really have a pay raise anymore, do I? I have a 1% pay cut. Have you ever thought about that before? I mean, that's real. So I might start off feeling really good, like, hey, my employer's giving me a raise. But if it doesn't keep up with inflation, now I have to completely rework my budget. I have to think about things in a different way. And that's really challenging. It's really hard for most people. Has that happened to you? I think it's probably happened to everybody. Tell me about your stories down in the comments below and we can talk about it further. Anyway, I'm here to provide clarity in a world of murkiness, so let's do it. Hey, I just wanted to stop and thank you for paying attention, for listening. I know these videos, a lot of them are for my students, but if you're not my students and you're watching, really appreciate that you're doing that. I'm a small-time channel, right? I have less than 500 subscribers, just a professor trying to make his way in the universe. So if you want to support me, just like, share, subscribe. I really appreciate all your support. All right, let's start off with some definitions. First, inflation. Okay, like I said, everybody thinks they know what inflation means. Everybody says, oh, the prices have gone up for my goods. And that is true, but it's also more than that. Formally speaking, inflation is a rise in the prices of goods and services in an economy. But here's the trick. Inflation is also an erosion in the purchasing power of money, a loss of real value in the internal medium of exchange and unit of account in the economy. In other words, inflation doesn't happen just because prices go up. Inflation happens because something happens to the currency that causes it to lose its value. So deflation, on the other hand, is a decline in the prices of goods and services in the economy. And as inflation reduces the real value of money over time, conversely, deflation increases the real value of money, the currency in a national or regional economy. So you'll find that inflation, and deflation for that matter, are tied to a couple of things. One is supply and demand. That is, the more currency there is floating around in the economy, the more the value of that currency goes down. And the less money there is floating around in the economy, the more that value goes up. The other thing that inflation and deflation are tied to is confidence. So if people don't have confidence in a currency, then its value is going to decline. And as we've pointed out in another video, this is a weird kind of psychological concept where if I don't believe that my currency is valuable, then its value is going to plummet, and that's going to create inflation. Consider pre-Nazi Germany, where the economy was so bad that people could more easily burn currency than they could purchase fuel for the fire. Or like Zimbabwe, for much of the 21st century, where it's battling inflation rates of up to 1,000,000%. I mean, can you imagine that? Keeping those factors in mind, we ask the question, what kinds of things cause inflation, right? Those two things do in a broad sense, but let's nail it down a little bit more specifically. Again, there's other videos I provide that go into this in more detail, but let's do a quick summary. First, there's consumer spending. The more people spend money, the more money is floating around in the economy, the more inflation is going to tend to go up. Big surprise, right? Less consumer spending, less inflation. Second, there's lending. So when lending becomes a lot looser and easier, you can get access to cash and there's a lot of credit cards running around and lots of loans, then there's more spending. And that means there's more money in the economy, and that means inflation goes up as well. There's more money chasing fewer products. That's the demand side of the equation, that there's just not enough products to meet the amount of money that's going around in the economy. The third thing is wages. So you get a raise, that means you're spending more money, which means guess what? Tends to put a little more pressure on prices, increasing inflation. Next, you have government spending. So a lot of this stuff can be affected by what we call fiscal policy. That is the government's decision to, say, increase spending or cut taxes. That would put more money in your hands, which means you're spending more money, or to cut spending or to increase taxes. That actually raises the value of your currency, and it also means that stuff is going to seem a little bit cheaper. Then there's the Fed, right? The Federal Reserve Bank affects interest rates. And so if they increase interest rates, then that means there's less money going around the economy. It becomes harder to get loans and harder to get access to money. So the currency value tends to increase and prices tend to decrease. Likewise, if we're cutting interest rates, that means that it's easier to get access to money, just like I mentioned before with the lending, and that means that we have more inflationary pressure. Prices tend to rise. Finally, you have the complicated question of trade. Now, trade is an interesting thing in which it can push a few different directions. First of all, consider free trade. The freer the trade, the more transactions, the more money's floating around, the more likely it is to be inflationary. But the other side of it is that as long as people can get access to the products they want, then maybe the inflation is less likely to happen because people are then connected. Say more about that here in a few minutes. But the other side of trade is protectionism. Tariffs, for example. If you're going to put tariffs on a product, you are going to get inflation, without a doubt. I mean, almost by definition. If I'm going to say, okay, these products that are come in from China, I'm the government and I'm going to tax those things, doesn't matter who pays for it. If the business ends up holding the bag, they're going to pass it on to the consumer because they can't continue to take losses on that sort of stuff. You are ultimately the one who's going to pay for it. So they have to raise their prices because now there's a new cost that's introduced into their equation, and they have to deal with that. Now, these causes are not absolute. If we think about increases in wages, for example, just because wages increase, it doesn't necessarily mean that inflation is going to increase. Or just because people are buying more products, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to increase. It really depends on how much the economy can absorb and how easily people are connected to their products. For example, through free trade, it's very easy for me to get access to almost anything that I want. As long as there aren't very many tariffs, as long as we don't have a lot of protectionist policies, there's loads of stuff. I could get stuff at my Walmart, I could get stuff at my Target, I could get stuff on Amazon, right? Stuff's going to come to me. And as long as I have the money and they have the thing that I want, then there's not going to be a shortage of those things, right? The shortage of products also tends to increase inflation. So as long as I get what I want and there's no shortages, all is well. We generally don't have inflation. But on the other hand, if we put barriers that keep those products from coming to us, then the prices are going to increase. So again, tariffs possibly causing shortages because there's less demand for those products. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about. In March 2020, we had a COVID pandemic. Now keep in mind, this was happening on the heels of President Donald Trump putting a whole lot of tariffs for the previous couple of years on a whole lot of products. So we already had upward pressure on prices due to tariffs. And we had the restructuring of supply chains as people were trying to find new ways to buy goods from places that didn't have tariffs on them. So the whole supply chain was going crazy, and we're starting to feel the strain of that. At the same time, you have COVID, which means that I mostly have to stay home. I'm not going to stores to buy stuff nearly as much. And if I want to buy stuff, I'm probably going to do more online purchases. So that means I'm going to buy say from Amazon, for example. Well, already supply chains are messed up. Now we have a problem where stuff's coming across the ocean on a container ship, and every container ship is having to be inspected for the presence of COVID, which created huge lines for miles out into the ocean as these ships came off and tried to dump their cargo so that it would enter the American economy. So in the meantime, I'm at home. I can't go out and be entertained like I normally would. Summertime's approaching and I'm thinking, hey, I need a swimming pool for my kids, a little backyard inflatable thing. I'll go to Amazon and buy one. Well, guess what? I'm not the only one doing that kind of thinking. There are loads and loads of other people. Everybody wants their swimming pools. But where are those swimming pools? They're out sitting on the ocean on container ships, which means I can't get them. So what happens to the price of those swimming pools that actually are in the United States and there's a shortage of them? That price tends to go up. So as a result of the supply chain issues, the fact that I want to spend money but I can't get the stuff that I need, that also causes inflation. So what did we learn? First of all, I hope that you learned enough to be able to cut through some of the stuff that people talk about when they're talking about inflation, where they're trying to use it as a political cudgel. The more you know about some of these concepts, the better you can understand what's happening in our world. Second, an understanding of inflation should also help you understand how currency value affects trade and investment. And third, this hopefully will help you understand the impact of government policy on business behavior, how trade flows go through, and how investment occurs. I hope all this information will help you navigate your business and political environment in a better, more informed way. Until next time, I'll see you later.